Here are some morbid facts about Albert Einstein. Around 1902, Einstein had an illegitimate child named Lee Searle with his future wife Mileva. Very little is known about the girl other than that she was mentally disabled and died from infection at a very young age. In all likelihood, Albert never met the girl in person. Her existence was only discovered in 1987 through a collection of letters. Soon afterwards, the relationship was falling apart, so Einstein made Mileva sign a contract to help work things out. It had multiple conditions such as that my clothes and laundry are kept in good order, that I will receive my 3 meals regularly in my room, and that my bedroom and study are kept neat at all times. After those two eventually got divorced, Einstein married the daughter of his mother's sister, making them first cousins. Despite being very smart, Albert's second son Edward was diagnosed with schizophrenia and described by his father as an insoluble problem. He was sent to a mental asylum at the age of 20 and remained there for the next 35 years before dying of a stroke in 1965. Einstein encouraged President Roosevelt to develop an atomic bomb because he feared the Nazis would make one first. But he deeply regretted this after hearing about the devastation of Hiroshima, and knowing that his discoveries led to the invention of the atomic bomb made him very depressed. After suffering from an aortic aneurysm in 1955, Einstein refused surgery, stating that he wanted to end his life gracefully. He was taken to the hospital but refused any further medical intervention. Einstein's last words were unfortunately lost forever since he said them in German, which the nurse treating him did not speak. The man who performed Einstein's autopsy stole his brain and kept it in a jar for 20 years. He found that the part of Einstein's brain that processes math and language was 15% bigger than the average human's. Einstein's eyeballs were also taken by the same man and now remain locked away in a safety deposit box in New York City. Morbid facts. While serving a life sentence for murder, Rocky Beeman brutally murdered a fellow inmate who was serving a life sentence for essaying a 10-year-old girl. But despite this, Beeman was later given a child rapist as his cellmate, who he proceeded to brutally murder as well. He said he resented sex offenders and that killing them gave him, quote, "the best feeling I've had in a long time." He also said the only way to stop him from killing them was to execute him. Grady Stiles Jr. was born in 1937 with a rare genetic condition known as ectrodactyly, which gave him claw-like hands and feet. He became a circus performer under the name Lobster Boy, but was known to be a viciously abusive alcoholic in person. In 1978, he was convicted of murdering his daughter's fiancé on the day before their wedding. He openly confessed to the murder but wasn't sent to prison since no state institution had the resources for an inmate with his condition. Stiles continued to perform until 1992 when he was murdered by a hitman hired by his wife and son. In the case that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were left stranded on the moon, NASA planned on cutting off communication with them. They didn't want to record how the men chose to die, leaving them to either run out of oxygen or take their own lives with no further earthly contact. FDNY Ladder 3 was one of the first units to show up at the World Trade Center on 9/11. Its crew of 11 men sadly perished in the collapse of the North Tower, and now their truck is on display in the 9/11 Museum. In April of 2015, 28-year-old Shayna Sims gained access to a funeral home in Tulsa, Oklahoma. She pretended to be a makeup artist to access the body of Tabitha Lynch. Apparently, Shayna resented Lynch and suspected that her husband had been having an affair with her. So as payback, Sims decided to mutilate Lynch's body, cutting up her face and removing multiple organs and chunks of her hair. Court sentenced her to 16 years in prison for unlawfully removing a body part from a corpse. In 2010, the teenage daughter of Michelle Kalina came across something horrifying in her mother's closet: the decomposed remains of 5 babies. Over the course of 14 years, Michelle gave birth to at least 5 children, ending their lives immediately after they were born. She was sentenced to between 20 and 40 years in prison. When Frank Zappa was a child, he always played with the mercury that his chemist father brought home from work, often covering his entire bedroom floor with the element. But childhood exposure to mercury is now known to cause prostate cancer as an adult, which Zappa would end up dying from at the age of 52. In 1978, over 2,000 students from Pennsylvania tried to set the world record for the largest game of tug-of-war. But instead, the 2,000-foot rope snapped, releasing several thousand pounds of stored energy. Nearly 200 students were wounded, 5 had their fingertips severed, and hundreds more received second-degree burns. Here's a 2021 photo of Alec Baldwin breaking down in tears after firing a prop gun that killed the director of photography on the movie set of Rust. The tragic incident happened as a result of catastrophic failures in safety procedures on the set. The woman who was responsible for checking the firearms was only 24 years old and had very little experience in her role. Rust was her second film as lead armorer, since she had previously worked on another Western film called The Old Way, where she received multiple safety complaints from the cast and crew. She also admitted on a podcast that she felt overwhelmed and underprepared for her job on Rust. The live round that killed Helena Hutchins and injured Joel Souza was not supposed to be on the set at all. The production had a very strict rule that banned any live ammunition on the premises, and only blanks or dummy rounds could be used. But it was later revealed that some of the crew members used the same guns for target practice with live rounds during their off hours, and had failed to properly clean and inspect the weapons before returning them to the armory. These are the hands of Japanese serial killer Tsutomu Miyazaki. He was born with a rare birth defect that caused his hand joints to be fused together, preventing him from being able to bend his wrists upwards. Two Mice Eating Cheese is the name of London's smallest statue, which commemorates 2 construction workers who died in 1862. They were scuffling over a missing sandwich that resulted in both of them falling off the scaffolding. Turns out it was just stolen by mice. The movie Jaws directly contributed to a surge in shark hunting and a massive drop in shark populations. Author Peter Benchley deeply regretted writing Jaws, saying, "Knowing what I know now, I could never write that book today. Sharks don't target human beings, and they certainly don't hold grudges." Today, sharks kill only around 10 humans per year, but humans kill around 11,000 sharks every hour. A 34-year-old man with ALS completely lost the ability to move anything, including his eyes. When a brain chip finally allowed him to communicate again, the first thing he said was, "I need a beer." There's typically an IQ minimum of 80 points to serve in the US military. But to meet the manpower requirements of the Vietnam War, the US Army loosened up on this policy and began recruiting soldiers with mental disabilities. These men were known as McNamara's morons and died at 5 times the rate of other Americans in the war. This is also what the character Forrest Gump was based on. A suicide bomber in Afghanistan was thwarted by a stray dog which barked and snarled at the man, causing him to prematurely detonate at the entrance. The dog was then flown to the United States and appeared on Oprah before being adopted. But tragically, she ran away from home and was captured by an animal shelter which ended up euthanizing her by mistake. In 1943, Polish ballerina Francesca Mann arrived at Auschwitz. When ordered to take off her clothes, she did so provocatively to divert the attention of the guards. While the roll call officer was distracted, she grabbed his gun and shot the man in the head. She then managed to wound another guard before other prisoners joined her rebellion until they were all shot dead. During the 1980s, Rebecca Schaeffer was the star of the popular CBS sitcom My Sister Sam. But in 1989, she was fatally shot in the doorway of her West Hollywood apartment by an obsessed fan who had been stalking her for over 3 years. The 21-year-old's death led to the passing of some of the first anti-stalking laws in America. This devastating photo was taken by Tom Stoddard during the Sudanese famine in 1998. It shows a well-nourished Sudanese man stealing a bag of corn from a starving child after it was given to him by a charity. Here's a photo of the unidentified victims of John Wayne Gacy being laid to rest at a mass funeral. In 2006, 18-year-old Ryan Waller was shot in the face during a Phoenix home invasion. His girlfriend was killed, but Ryan somehow survived. However, police mistakenly treated Ryan as a suspect, not a victim. Despite a severe bullet wound in his head, Ryan was interrogated for hours and denied medical treatment. He eventually passed away as a result of the horrific negligence. When Theo Von was born in 1980, his dad Roland was 70 years old. Theo says he was always afraid to develop a relationship with Roland because he knew his dad would die when he was at a young age. His father ended up dying in an accidental shooting accident when Theo was 16 years old. British man Andrew Haig was sentenced to life in prison earlier this year after beating his 50-year-old neighbor to death with a bag of Pokemon cards. The two had gotten into an argument after Haig's neighbor accused him of being a pedophile. In 2012, Texas nurse Kimberly Sains was sentenced to life in prison after killing 5 of her patients by injecting bleach into their dialysis lines. Here are some of the distress calls that were painted onto houses during Hurricane Katrina in 2005. Many refused to evacuate their homes because they weren't allowed to bring any pets into sheltering areas. The Category 5 hurricane ended up taking the lives of around 1,400 people and 500,000 pets. In September of 2008, Blink-182 drummer Travis Barker survived a plane crash that killed 4 out of the 6 people on board. He suffered third-degree burns over 65% of his body and underwent 16 surgeries over an 11-week span. Travis was in so much pain that he repeatedly called friends and offered them over $1 million to help him end his own life. A prion disease called kuru can be contracted when a human consumes another human's brain. It was typically found in cannibals from New Guinea who would consume the brains of their dead relatives as part of a funerary ritual. The fatal disease would slowly form holes in the victims' brains and cause them to laugh uncontrollably. In 2016, a Texas father drove home and went to sleep, forgetting that his 6-month-old daughter was still strapped to her car seat. Hours later, he found her unresponsive in the blistering hot car. Before attempting CPR and calling 911, he brought her inside and placed her in the refrigerator to try and revive her. But the child had likely died hours earlier, and the man was charged with manslaughter. In 2018, 16-year-old Kevin Watkins was lagging horribly while attempting to play Xbox in his Georgia family's home. In an effort to improve the speed, he decided to change the Wi-Fi password to prevent others from using it and slowing down the connection while he was gaming. Soon enough, an argument broke out between Kevin and his mom, escalating to a point where his older sister Alexis had to step in to prevent Kevin from physically harming their mother. Tragically, Kevin placed Alexis in a strong chokehold and refused to let go despite his younger brother and mother begging for him to stop. By the time police arrived 15 minutes later, Alexis was no longer moving or responsive, but Kevin still had her in a chokehold. She had been starved of oxygen for a lengthy amount of time, resulting in extreme brain damage. Alexis was quickly rushed to the hospital, but was soon pronounced dead from asphyxiation. Kevin was tried for murder and sentenced to life in prison for the tragic incident. In 1998, Dana Carvey underwent open heart surgery to clear a blocked artery, but the surgeon operated on the wrong blood vessel. After spending 6 months recovering from the life-threatening botch, he won a $7.5 million lawsuit against the hospital and donated all of it to charity. In 2015, an Italian grandma accidentally sent 2 adults and 3 children to the hospital after making them hot cocoa that had expired in 1990. In 2013, a collection of files revealed that the U.S. government lobotomized over 2,000 veterans against their will after World War II. They were lobotomized for reasons such as PTSD, depression, schizophrenia, and homosexuality. Actress Brittany Murphy and her husband both mysteriously passed away from pneumonia and severe anemia in their home only 5 months apart. Murphy's mom believes both of them were victims of toxic mold. Jonah Hill had to be hospitalized while filming The Wolf of Wall Street after snorting too much fake cocaine. In 2021, an 82-year-old man from Austria had the wrong leg amputated during surgery. The man was told he would still need his other leg amputated as well. The hospital said the incident occurred as a result of a sequence of unfortunate circumstances. Here's a devastating photo of a Colorado police officer distracting a little girl after her dad lost his life in a car accident. Judy Melanick is a medical examiner who identified hundreds of bodies after the 9/11 attacks, most of which were just scraps of flesh or pieces of limbs. She was called in August of 2002 because someone had found a foot bone on top of a skyscraper a quarter-mile away from Ground Zero. Jeanette McCurdy has described the relationship she had with her mother Deborah as both emotionally and sexually abusive. When Jeanette was 3 years old, her mother was diagnosed with breast cancer and underwent multiple surgeries and transplants. As a result, Deborah would perform routine vaginal and breast exams on Jeanette and never allowed her to shower alone until she turned 17. Living in poverty, her mother forced Jeanette into acting when she was 6 years old to financially support the family, and because Deborah had always wanted to become famous herself. McCurdy says that her mother was obsessed with making her a star and introduced Jeanette to a calorie restriction once she turned 11, leading to various eating disorders that Jeanette still struggles with, including anorexia and bulimia. McCurdy says that she refused to appear in the revival series of iCarly only because she didn't want to be reminded of her mother's abuse during the original show. Just last year, Jeanette released a book with the title I'm Glad My Mom Died 9 years after she passed away from breast cancer. South Korean actor Jo Son is known for playing Random Task in the first Austin Powers movie. But in 2008, he was sentenced to 7 years in prison for torturing and essaying a female victim on Christmas Day. 3 years later, 27 years were added onto his sentence after he murdered his cellmate. In 2019, Florida man Grant Amato murdered his mother, father, and brother and tried to stage it as a murder-suicide committed by his brother. But police didn't buy his story when they found out his parents were threatening to kick him out of their house over his severe porn addiction. He had stolen over $200,000 from them and spent it all on a cam model from Bulgaria. In 1916, a Tennessee circus elephant named Mary murdered her handler by crushing his head on his second day of the job. The circus owner then decided to publicly execute the 6,000-pound elephant by hanging her from a crane. After she was killed in front of a crowd of 2,500 men, women, and children, an autopsy revealed that she had a severely infected tooth that was likely the cause of her murderous rage. The photo on the right shows a Houston police officer reacting outside the home where Andrea Yates drowned her 5 children in 2001. She started by holding 3 of her boys underwater in her bathtub until they stopped struggling. She then drowned her 6-month-old Mary, whom she left floating in the tub. Her last living child, Noah, soon walked in and asked what was wrong with Mary, then ran when he realized what was going on. But Yates quickly caught up to the 7-year-old and drowned him as well. Afterwards, she laid the lifeless bodies of her children together in her bed. She then called the police, repeatedly saying she needed an officer but refusing to say why. During the trial, the defense argued that Yates was severely mentally ill and not in control of her actions during the murders. She was in a deeply delusional state, believing she needed to murder her children to prevent them from going to hell. In 2006, she was found not guilty by reason of insanity and committed to a high-security mental hospital in Texas where she remains to this day. In 2011, Chicago man Robert Lyons bludgeoned his mother with a champagne bottle before relentlessly stabbing her and pouring chemicals all over her body. He did this all because she refused to buy him skybox tickets for an upcoming Avril Lavigne concert. Robert was 39 years old at the time. This was the last photo taken of resistance leader Chiang Bin-Hua just moments before she was executed by bayonet. She led a Chinese guerrilla movement against the Japanese during the invasion of her country before she was captured in 1938. While in captivity, the 24-year-old was brutally tortured and gang-raped by several guards but died with a defiant smile on her face. In 2022, 70-year-old Maya Murma was collecting water in India when an elephant suddenly trampled her. She was quickly rushed to the hospital, but ended up dying from her catastrophic injuries. When family members gathered for her funeral, the same elephant appeared, threw Murmu's body into the air, and trampled it again. In 2018, Kaylee Mudhart ripped out her own eyeballs and smashed them with her hands during a meth-induced psychotic episode. Kaylee had been awake for almost 48 hours straight, snorting and injecting a concoction of tainted methamphetamine which caused horrific hallucinations. These photos were taken at the wedding of Heather and David Mosher at a Connecticut chapel in 2017. Heather was battling advanced breast cancer but found the strength to marry the love of her life just 18 hours before passing away. In 1975, 197 passengers on a Japan Airlines flight became sick after eating food contaminated with staph bacteria. 144 of them were so ill that they required hospitalization, while 30 of them ended up in critical condition. Turns out one of the cooks who prepared the food had infected lesions on one of his hands. Morbid sports facts. 2006, the Miami Hurricanes football team gathered in prayer for their teammate Brian Pata after he had been murdered by an unknown assailant. 15 years later, his teammate Rashawn Jones ended up being charged with his murder. During a 1998 soccer match in the Republic of Congo, a lightning bolt struck one of the goal pitches. It killed all 11 members of the home team because they were all wearing metal spikes. But the other team was left completely unscathed, for they had been wearing rubber cleats. During the 1910s, there was an American baseball team that completely consisted of death row prisoners. As long as they kept winning, their executions were delayed. Hall of Fame boxer Sugar Ray Robinson once had a nightmare where he killed his next opponent in the ring. Afraid that his dream was telling him something, he initially backed out of his next fight until a priest convinced him otherwise. He ended up scoring a decisive knockout in the 8th round that resulted in the death of his opponent, Jimmy Doyle. In 1989, the Buffalo Sabres goalie had his neck sliced by another player's skate, severing his carotid artery. It resulted in so much blood loss that 11 fans fainted, 2 had heart attacks, and 3 players puked on the ice. His life was saved by the team medic, who luckily served in the Vietnam War as a combat medic. In 1962, a Cuban boxer named Benny Paret made fun of his opponent Emil Griffith for being a homosexual. Griffith ended up beating Paret so badly that he fell into a coma and died 10 days after the fight. In 1973, the U.S. Army developed an anti-tank grenade by hollowing out a Nerf football and filling it with explosives. However, the ball never made it to the battlefield since the explosives gave it an unpredictable flight. In 1977, the University of Evansville men's basketball team was involved in a tragic plane crash. The crash killed every player on the team except for one man who didn't make the trip due to an injury. 2 weeks later, that only remaining player was killed by a drunk driver. Morbidly wholesome facts. 2 of Kurt Cobain's best friends, Mark Lanigan and Dylan Carson, say that Courtney Love saved their lives after Kurt's death. They were struggling addicts at the time, and Courtney felt that Kurt would want them to be saved. So she decided to support them both morally and financially so that they could go to rehab and turn their lives around. A man's dying wish was to be buried on his Harley Davidson in a glass casket so that his rider friends could see his final ride. If a pregnant mother suffers organ damage, the baby in the womb sends stem cells to repair the damaged organ. While on death row for killing a police officer in 1987, Tennessee man Philip Workman was told to make his last meal request. But instead of a meal for himself, he wanted a pizza to be donated to a local homeless person. His final request was denied, and Workman refused to eat anything before he was executed that night. But the next day, homeless shelters across Tennessee received thousands of donated pizzas from people all over the state honoring Workman's last request. Keanu Reeves' sister Kim was diagnosed with the deadly blood cancer leukemia in 1991. In response, he sold his home to move closer to her, cleaned her house, cooked her meals, and provided all of her necessary medications. Once she recovered, Keanu started a private charity to fund cancer research in children's hospitals. In 2009, he was interviewed saying, "I don't like to attach my name to it, I just let the foundation do what it does." Frank Sinatra died the night of Seinfeld's finale, and his ambulance made it to the hospital in record time since there was no traffic due to everyone watching the show. Hans Scharf, the most successful Nazi interrogator in World War II, never physically harmed an enemy soldier. Instead, he treated them with respect and kindness, taking them for walks, letting them visit their captured comrades in the hospital, and even letting captured pilots go on test flights. His methods were very successful since virtually everyone ended up talking. Photos taken before disaster. This photo taken last month shows 7-year-old Arthur Bittencourt giving a thumbs up while playing in a pile of poisonous limestone powder in Brazil. Just minutes later, Arthur was tragically fighting for his life after accidentally inhaling particles of the toxic substance. He was quickly rushed to the hospital and pronounced dead on arrival. In 2022, Ukrainian woman Irina Filkina had her photo taken after getting a manicure for Valentine's Day. A few weeks later, she was killed by a tank while pushing her bicycle in the town of Bucha, and her body was identified by her manicure. This photo taken in 2004 shows Deborah Garlick enjoying the island paradise of Phi Phi in Thailand. But soon afterwards, a massive tsunami struck the area, killing around 230,000 people in total. This was the last photo taken on Deborah's camera before she was tragically swept away by the wave. This peaceful photo of the New York City skyline was taken from the Manhattan Bridge around 8:30 a.m. on September 11, 2001. Just 16 minutes later, a plane would crash into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Here's a pic of volcanologist David A. Johnston 13 hours before he was killed by the eruption of Mount St. Helens in 1980. He was the first to report the eruption from an observation post 6 miles away, transmitting the message, "Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it," just before he was swept away by a lateral blast traveling at near supersonic speed. He had spent the last several months of his life studying the volcano, and his alert likely saved thousands of lives. These are some of the craziest torture devices in history that were actually used. The Scold's Bridle was a device used to publicly humiliate women until the 19th century. On the inside, the device had a metal plate that would press down on the tongue and prevent the wearer from speaking. It was placed on women who were said to be difficult to keep them quiet and prevent them from gossiping. These punishing shoes were a type of medieval torture device. The victim would have to stand on their tippy toes for as long as they could, before falling back and having rusty spikes jammed into their heel. Rat torture was another medieval method that involved putting a bunch of rats into a cage that was strapped to the victim's stomach. The top of the cage was then slowly heated, forcing the rats to burrow through the victim's body to escape the heat. During the Middle Ages, there was a form of torture where the victim's feet were covered in salt and a goat would start licking them. Known as tickle torture, it would become extremely painful once the skin was worn away by the rough tongue of the goat, creating a wound with salt slowly trickling in. Insane coincidences. In 2003, a woman found a painting in the trash on a New York City curb. She felt it had power, so she took it home without knowing anything about its value or origin. After holding on to it for 4 years, she eventually discovered that it was a very valuable Mexican painting that was stolen in 1987. So she contacted authorities and received a $15,000 reward plus a percentage of its sale price of over $1 million. In August of 2010, a 13-year-old British teenager was struck by lightning at 1313 on Friday the 13th. He was the only one struck amongst a crowd of 150,000 people who were watching an air show. In 2014, a 39-year-old Brazilian woman named Adriana wanted to find her mother who abandoned her as a baby. So she went on a TV show and ended up finding her mom through the power of the internet. The two had an emotional reunion, but her mother revealed that she had also abandoned Adriana's infant brother, Leandro. In a bizarre twist, Adriana's husband turned out to be her brother, Leandro. But despite the pair being siblings, they vowed to never separate. Proof that animals are evolving. Firstly, here's a video of Rambo the orangutan casually driving a golf cart around a private zoo in Dubai. Rambo has apparently been driving since she was very young and has since graduated from small toy cars to golf carts. She even looks through the rearview mirror and slows down at turns, demonstrating better driving abilities than most humans. This video shows the 200 IQ intelligence of a wild hare. Knowing that the hunting dog is following its scent, the hare runs forward along the path before doubling back and running off in the opposite direction once the dog passes. Here's a video of a chimpanzee displaying impressive skills while taking a visual memory test. Chimps can actually perform this task far better than humans since they've developed excellent visual memory in order to spot dangers in the wild incredibly quickly. Artifact porn. This creepy looking costume is actually a 16th century scuba suit designed by Leonardo da Vinci. It was equipped with 2 breathing tubes attached to a cork diving bell floating on the surface. While working in the water city of Venice, Da Vinci designed the suit for sneak attacks on enemy ships from underwater. This golden throne chair was found in the tomb of King Tut. Its colors haven't faded over 3,000 years, highlighting the impressive skills of ancient Egyptian craftsmen. Here's the anchor of a 13th century Mongol invasion ship that was just recently lifted out of the sea near Nagasaki, Japan. Discovered in a dried up lake bed in New Mexico, this mile-long path of footprints is the longest prehistoric human trail ever found. The 12,000-year-old tracks belong to a toddler and its young adult mother who was in a hurry and sometimes carried the child on her back. It was most likely a perilous journey since scientists also found the footprints of mammoths, giant sloths, direwolves, and saber-toothed tigers at the same site. Oldest things in the world. At just under 2,000 years old, the oldest bottle of olive oil was discovered under the volcanic ash of Herculaneum. The discovery was extremely important to science since it shed some light on the molecular evolution of olive oil over time. The earliest known manufactured mirrors were found in Turkey and are approximately 8,000 years old. They were made of obsidian and had impressively good optical quality according to researchers. Built around 1300 BC, the Archidiko Bridge in Greece is the oldest arch bridge that's still in use today. It was used as a chariot bridge some 3,300 years ago. The world's oldest purse was found in a grave in Germany and was made sometime around 2500 BC. The fabric it was made of has disintegrated over the years, but it was studded with over 100 ancient dog teeth which remain intact. The Vimos coat is a 22-pound piece of iron chain armor made by hand from roughly 20,000 tiny rings. Known as the oldest completely preserved chainmail in the world, it was likely thrown into a Danish peat bog as a victory offering after battle some 1800 years ago. The world's oldest spear tip was discovered in England in 1911. It was likely made by Neanderthals around 400,000 years ago. Built around the 13th century, La Maison des Jeans is the oldest known house in France. Back then, houses were taxed based on the size of the ground floor, so they were often built with a smaller foundation than the rest of the house. The world's oldest light bulb that still works has been burning since 1901 and can be found at a California firehouse. Its longevity has baffled scientists for decades since it's been left on for 24 hours a day for almost 122 years straight.